All right, there we go. And we are live with the great and powerful Ryan Andrews. Ryan, thank you so much for taking some time to jump on a call with me today.
Yeah, James, it's nice to connect again with you.
I think it's been a while. If I'm correct, I think the last time we connected was when I was living in Boston and we went to Sweet Greens, I believe it's called, for lunch and kind of walked around downtown and did all that jazz. That feels like forever ago.
Yeah, we had a good lunch, a good chat. I love Sweet Green. And I think before that, I feel like we connected. You were an intern at Cressy's, weren't you?
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Back in the day.
I think the first time I ever met you officially was you were an intern at Cressy's, and I think Dean Somerset and Tony Gentilcore were having a weekend continuing ed workshop. And I remember connecting with you, and I was like, oh, James is smart and James is jacked. Like, I need to connect with this guy and stay in touch with him.
That was a great weekend because you were there.
It was.
Mark Fisher was there. That was the first time I got to connect with Mark and his glorious head of hair. And Jim Smith, Smitty from Diesel, was there.
Ben Bruno
was there. Was a really solid crew there. And as a super young, like within 1 year of doing this for a living strength coach, that was such an awesome weekend. Such an awesome weekend, both from a networking and education standpoint. It was great.
Yeah, I was energized for sure.
Need more of those. But let's do this. So this is everybody's least favorite part of the podcast. For the people listening that don't know who you are, can you give them the rundown on who Ryan Andrews is, what you've done, what you're currently doing? I'm very familiar with your background, all the work that you've done at Precision Nutrition, a company that our listeners are probably very familiar with, but would love to hear in your own words the elevator pitch on who you are, what you do.
Yeah, I have been involved in nutrition and health and fitness, gosh, pretty much since I was about 14 years old. I really got into this world as a competitive bodybuilder. So between the ages of 14 and 20, that was my life. So high school and some of college, I was training to become the biggest, baddest, best bodybuilder in the United States at my age group. And it was a great thing for me at the time because I was kind of floundering in life, and bodybuilding taught me so many important lessons about, grit and hard work and goal setting and all that stuff. And I mean, the biggest thing for me too with bodybuilding was that I didn't know you could change your training and change your eating and then change your physique. I was like, this is remarkable. Why did my parents not tell me this at a younger age? So that was really empowering to me. And I thought, I have to study this. I have to help people with this. And that's what I did. I went to college and graduate school and studied nutrition and exercise physiology and did some certifications and ended up becoming officially a dietitian. I was a little bit back and forth because I had kind of mixed feelings about the dietetics community early on. And I thought, if I ever really want to immerse myself in the world of nutrition, I should probably become a dietitian. And it ended up being a really good decision overall. And I did a wonderful internship to become a dietitian at Johns Hopkins after graduate school. And I learned so much about the deep world of clinical nutrition, which was very helpful. And throughout this whole process, I should say, I went from being in that bodybuilder mindset of like, what is this meal going to do for my physique? And I felt like every year or two, I started to learn a little bit more about health and the food system. And so it just kept expanding. So I first was thinking, how can I help other people with their health? How can I help make changes in the food system for farm workers and animals? So it just kept growing over the years, which kind of led me to where I am today. I still work with Precision Nutrition. I don't do quite as much as I used to. I do some mainly advisory things with them now, but for many years, I was involved in leading some of their coaching groups and helping to write the PN certification content and writing a lot of the blog content. And I think I was officially maybe like the 7th employee at PN. And I think now they have, I don't know, 200 employees or something. So it's grown substantially since I first started. But for your listeners, I mean, working with PN has been a life-changing experience because you get to work with people like John Berardi and Krista Scott Dixon, Brian St. Pierre, Nate Green. I mean, these are people who I continue to learn so much from.
Yeah, without question. Thank you for the quick background. And yeah, I think because I had met you, and when we first met, I had no idea that you had been involved in precision nutrition. I didn't realize it until I signed up for the PN level 1 cert, and I got the textbook in the mail, and I was like, hey, hold on. I know this guy. This name on the cover, I know him. I met him. We've been emailing.
Yeah, I've had several people do that where they're like, wait a minute, they take a picture and send it to me like, you didn't tell me that. Yeah.
So with your very extensive background in this realm, where I wanted to start the conversation today is talking about this behavior and habit change surrounding nutrition, because we talked about this a little bit off air. The actual nuts and bolts of nutrition are not that complicated for normal, healthy humans. If we're talking disease, obviously things get far more complex. Disease does that in every aspect of physiology. But just in normal, healthy humans, people like to make nutrition very complicated, and they like to turn it into this very tribalistic, almost warfare type thing of like keto versus paleo versus this versus this. And it's like, well, at its core, the basics of nutrition are really not that hard. And I think the vast majority of people can be in the ballpark of what they should be eating. Most people know I shouldn't be pounding soda and crushing fast food. Like, they're doing it, but if you ask them, they're like, yeah, I should probably do this less, right? And then with our people here at Rebel, the majority of them are under eating by a pretty substantial amount. You're training 4 to 6 days a week. You probably are just a little bit more of a type A, high strung, high performance individual who pushes it both outside the gym and in the gym and at your profession, whatever you do for work and for a living. And whether you're in that group or the group that's potentially trying to, like, I want to lose weight, so I need better habits and choices around food, it always comes back to what I just mentioned of the habits, the choices, and the behaviors. Because the nuts and bolts of, all right, like, we need to be eating lean meat and protein. We need some vegetables. You need some carbs like potatoes or rice. And then we need some fat. Like, it's not that complex. And even if you wanted to get into the realm of macros, you can make macros really simple. Be it a gram per pound body weight for protein. Be somewhere in the point, like 0.5, 0.7 grams per pound fat, somewhere in that realm. And then you essentially fill in carbs as you can handle them as needed. So it's clearly not an education, what should I do problem, because what should I do is actually quite simple. It's more of the execution and the how. And so I would love to hear from you on what are, I mean, I think if we wanted to talk about this as like tactics or strategies, what are some ways people can actually approach nutrition more from this habit and behavior change standpoint so they can give themselves a chance to be successful? Even if it's somebody, because I fall into this too, where I probably undereat just because I hate eating lunch, right? And just getting yourself to eat more food is a big change, right? And so if we wanted to shrink this down and make it small, how can people actually stack the deck in their favor to make these nutrition habit changes that are going to stick, so that we're not in this yo-yo phase of like, I'm going to go all in on this thing for 6 weeks, and then I'm just going to go all the way back to where I was because it was an unrealistic, unsustainable goal.
Mm-hmm. You said it. I mean, knowledge isn't the limiting factor for the majority of people. I learned very early that people are juggling a lot when it comes to food choices. So when somebody sits down to eat a meal on a given day, they might have budgetary considerations, they have job and time considerations, they have kids they're looking after, they have certain food preferences, maybe they don't digest certain foods well. So they have all these things that they're thinking about when they make a food choice. And when you add on some sort of a performance, body composition or performance goal or pursuit, like I want to eat more to support my recovery and training, that's another thing to consider. And it can become very overwhelming. And a lot of people just throw their hands up and kind of give up and hope for the best. And one of the things I really like to encourage people to do is think about low-hanging fruit. So you know how you'd like your eating to be different. How could you make a change that requires very minimal effort and disruption in your life? Because a lot of times, for example, when it comes to eating more food, I think kind of the knee-jerk response is, well, I need to find a new meal plan with all new foods and new recipes at new times and new combinations. And that requires essentially a life overhaul. You have to go buy the food and figure out how to prepare and store the food and time the food. It's a major deal. Versus if you were able to find one single small thing to change, that can be realistic, doable, fairly easy. And for people that are gaining weight, I often like to start with one of two things if I'm going to offer a suggestion. I'd say one, adding more to an existing meal. Sounds like ridiculously simplistic, but it's a good first option to consider. Maybe that's been exhausted and they've already tried that. That's totally fine, but it's one thing to consider. Can you just add more to a meal that you are already eating on a given day? And then beyond that, can you add in another meal somewhere? And if the idea of adding in another meal is just absolutely, you can't imagine it in any way, consider meal in another form, like some sort of a shake or a quote unquote like snack combination that doesn't require cooking or food prep or anything like that. So those are like my two go-to suggestions for people who are trying to gain weight usually is, can you simply add more to an existing meal, or add in, like sneak in another meal somewhere throughout your day?
Yeah, 100% in agreement there, because if you're already consistently eating X number of meals per day, the easiest change is just to add a little bit of more food to each of those meals. But I think the problem a lot of people run into, as you mentioned, is they don't want to think about what's the lowest hanging fruit. What's the easiest, lowest path of resistance to start moving in this direction, because they want this change to happen now. It's like, oh, well, I want to be here and I want it to happen within 3 days. They're not thinking, well, with body composition and performance and nutrition, we have to expand our time scale out a little bit. We have to think about what's going to be able to sustain this over the long haul. And I think that's another potential problem, is just we want everything now mentality, as opposed to staying patient and saying, well, maybe if I just add a banana to this meal and add an extra, quarter cup of rice to this meal, and then add maybe like a protein shake to this meal. Just doing that and being consistent with that for the next 4 weeks is going to move me in the direction that I want to see. And then when that starts to plateau, okay, cool. Now I can add a little bit more. Okay, now I'm moving again. But I think people just want everything to happen immediately. And they're not willing to play this game of, okay, let's just put me on the right trend line. I'm moving in the right direction. Eventually that trend line is going to plateau. And now we have to change something again, whether it's removing food or adding some more food. Okay, cool. Now I'm back on the trend line I want to be on. I'm going to ride this as long as I can. Do you think that that's a general fair assessment of one of the big things that gets in people's way of they feel they have to change everything because they want it to happen so quickly and they're not willing to pace themselves over the long term?
Yeah, stepping back, I do think that's a problem. And I don't blame people, because that's kind of how our society is structured. Mm-hmm. for no matter what you're trying to accomplish, it's usually kind of promoted to you as like a quick fix type of thing. So I don't blame people for thinking about it like that necessarily. But we want it to we want to make a change, and you want to almost forget you made the change and have it become in the background. And a byproduct of that change is you're recovering better, you're gaining muscle mass, you're performing better. And then, like you said, when a plateau happens again, then you reassess and make another change if you need to. But if day in and day out, you are just white knuckling it and holding on for dear life, like, I can't do this anymore, I hate food prep, I'm miserable, that's a sign we probably need to adjust things a little bit. You want it to become almost like it's a non-issue each day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned food prep there, because I'm one of those people. I hate prepping food. Hate it. It makes eating and food for me the most miserable experience. I can't stand it. Like, if I have to prep my food and I'm eating the same thing for lunch it makes eating so unenjoyable for me that I just end up not doing it. As bad as that sounds, I'm like, I don't like lunch, right? Lunch is just the most obnoxious meal of the day because it interrupts everything I'm doing. I don't want to stop to eat lunch. But I think this message essentially of small change, if you're consistent small change over time leads to very large outcomes and results, as opposed to trying to scrap everything at once.
Yes, and I like your example. Sorry to cut you off.
Go for it.
I think another thing that comes up is with nutrition, we want like this perfect meal plan to happen. So we want like scratch food prep, the best ingredients, like hours in the kitchen. And hey, I like that. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're able to do that. But this is a time too to take advantage, if you're able to, with your budget and your accessibility. If you can rely on frozen veggies sometimes, great. If you can get pre-cut salad veggies, great. Because I think sometimes people do that, like, this isn't true food prep. Like, I'm cheating the system. I have
cheat,
to like
baby. Cheat.
Yeah. Take advantage of some of these modern inventions that can make our lives much easier if you're able to do it. So consider those things as well. That can be really helpful.
I think anytime that you can afford that time trade, it's 1,000,000% worth it. Right? Because the biggest thing we're always trying to vie for is more time. Time is the ultimate currency. You can essentially equate wealth by time, more or less. Right? Like, how much do I have to work to acquire this thing that I want? And that's essentially a sign of wealth in one way or another. And I think in the nutrition realm, especially what we're talking about right now, stack the deck in your favor, right? Like, you don't have to do everything from scratch. If you have the funds, like you were mentioning, I know people who they'll go do all the grocery shopping because they're really particular about, the quality of the food they want to buy, this, that, and the other. And then they know the recipes they want to have prepared. And there are plenty of people now that you can find that'll come to your house on a Sunday. They'll do all the prep for you. They'll chop it, they'll make it, they'll do the dishes when they're done. And then your food is ready for you for the week. And it's just sitting in your fridge, right? Like, if you can afford that, a really nice option. Similar to if you can afford to have your groceries delivered. Maybe that's a way that you can win back some time. Then you can spend more time cooking. But the time factor here is always going to be important. It's the one thing that we're always trying to get more of, or trying to win back time in one way or another. I think in the food prep realm, that's where it can get really difficult. So if there are places where you can make that time trade, do it, because it's going to make things way easier for you. I always think of it in chemistry where we have these activation energy barriers. And the lower I can make that activation energy barrier, the better, the easier it's going to be. So do it. Right? I don't know if you would agree with that general assessment.
Yeah, and this is where, it can be helpful to kind of talk through it with a close friend or coach or something. Because sometimes you get in your own head and you kind of create these scenarios of what needs to happen with your eating. And you've created this fantasy world that doesn't make any sense. Like, I got to do scratch food prep every day for 5 hours. I'm never going to do it. I can't do it. Well, what about, using frozen veggies 3 days a week, or hiring meal prep every once a month, or it's just different kind of solutions that can make life a little bit easier. And if, coming back to the big picture here, if that really is your limiting factor, is just not having the nutritious food around when you're ready to eat, that could make a big difference. It could come up that you do all these things and that still doesn't help for some reason. Then you might have to step back and kind of reassess and think, what else is going on here?
Yeah, I think the having the food available and around you is one of the most important things that you can do, right? Because if you come home and you're hungry, you need to have a meal, and your cabinets are full of one type of food versus another, or what you have in your fridge, that's another moment where we can make a decision. And it's like, well, I'm really hungry, but I don't have much, but I do have this tub of ice cream in the fridge, and that sounds really good right now. So I'm just going to go hammer this because I'm starving and I have chips, I have salsa, but there's not any real food lying around. That's where I think people don't utilize shakes enough. I probably utilize shakes too much, to be honest. I'm like so quick to just go make a protein shake, have an apple and a banana, and then 2 tablespoons of almond butter. I love that. That makes me so happy. It's so simple. It's not real food, but it serves its purpose for what that needed to be right then. But yeah, I think shakes and those types of snacks, especially in this realm of we're trying to figure out ways to potentially get in more food to supplement either gaining weight, making physique changes, or just recovering and improving performance. Like, use shakes. Use them, right? Like, as long as you tolerate the protein powder well, you're not getting digestive issues from it. And you may have to just try a couple of different powders along the way. Like, you can do, like, my go-to is I can go a scoop of whey protein. I use hydrolyzed whey protein from True Nutrition. It's the one I found that I digest best. Throw in a scoop of greens powder, a rice cake with an apple or a banana, and then 2 tablespoons of almond butter. And that's a really easy, quick snack / small meal. Doesn't take long to make. I think it's delicious. And it's a low hurdle. Again, I think you want to make it as easy for you as you can.
Well, and you're reminding me too of another kind of concept that ties into this really well. A shake for you is a go-to default meal in your rotation. You like it, you feel good after having it, it supports your goals, you're familiar with it. As much as we can all come up with a short list of go-to default meals, that is going to be a lifesaver with your long-term nutrition, because we all have go-to meals. They might not support all of our goals, but we have meals we go to. Like, we always go to the same restaurant, we eat the same thing when we get home. It serves a purpose. If we can just restructure those go-to and default meals, that can completely change people's nutrition. And it can depend. Some people maybe have one go-to breakfast and they don't need any variety. And then maybe they need a little bit more variety at dinner. So they have like 5 dinners or something. They rotate through every couple of weeks. But print them out, post them on the fridge. If you can get in that routine and have those default meals, that can be so helpful long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of those single breakfast people. I think I've had the same breakfast every day for probably the last 6 years. I love breakfast. It makes me so happy. Breakfast is fantastic. Dinners can be a little bit more complex, right? I can get a little bit bored with dinner sometimes, but I generally have, as you mentioned, I probably have like 5 to 6 consistent dinners that I'm always making. And then on a Friday or Saturday night is when my wife and I will get just fancier and actually make a really good dinner. We spend way more time cooking. We make sauces and do all the other, like, just the bigger time commitment of it. Whereas during the week, it's more, what can I make that's going to be quick and still taste good and get the job done, right? It's usually just some type of grilled meat, a salad or cucumber salad or broccoli slaw or green beans, and then rice or potatoes. And that generally covers my bases. And then the Friday or Saturday nights are where we're going to, do a nice steak and really spend time and effort on it and essentially just try to make something as bomb as we can. And I found that just having that little thing to look forward to on a Friday or Saturday just kind of resets the switch of getting away from what can be a little bit boring from Monday through Friday, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And I love how you describe it, because I think sometimes that's all it takes. People can find a lot of comfort in some of the same familiar meals and some repeats on occasion, and then kind of going all out and trying a brand new recipe or going out to a restaurant or something like that is nice on occasion. And it kind of, like you said, resets things a bit. And this is where experimentation can come in handy too with your nutrition. So if you have absolutely no default meals, then you'll have to experiment with some. Some might work, some might not, for a variety of reasons. But when you can get that short list, it's a really nice feeling, because it kind of frees up some of that mental bandwidth too, instead of every week feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to start from scratch with coming up with meal ideas for the week. And that can be overwhelming.
It's totally exhausting. If you're trying to come up with brand new recipes every single night of the week, it's just way too much mental capacity going there, right? You only have so much of that kind of willpower essentially to begin with. So don't drain it always trying to come up with new recipes all the time. But the other reason I really like having that Friday or Saturday night as a reset is it makes it, for me at least, it makes the experience of food more of what it should be. Because I think food is inherently meant to bring people together. It's meant to be shared with other people. And nothing makes me happier really than when it's me, my wife, maybe some friends, and we're just cooking up a really big dinner and we take our time and it's more about the experience as opposed to during the week where it's very much like, okay, I need to cook it. I need to eat it. I need to be done with it. Being able to slow down and really enjoy that whole experience with people is another thing that I think is really important and overlooked in this food nutrition realm. Just because, yeah, I'm very much like food is meant to bring us together. We're meant to be eating it together around, right, a fire and talking and communicating and chatting about how the day went. Like I was very fortunate growing up that we had family dinner every night, always, and it was just a staple. And so that's one of those things that I've really come to enjoy and look forward to, right? But I think that's another bit of that Friday and Saturday reset that's nice is we can afford to take that time and really enjoy the food and the company that comes with it and the experiences.
Yeah. And I mean, back to eating enough food and trying to maintain weight and promote recovery and gain muscle. I mean, it can be a chore to do that. I mean, and so I like that you're not completely, I think back to my bodybuilding days, it was like taking another bite of eggs. I was like, oh, I can't eat another bite. This is terrible. So it's nice to at least maybe on a weekly basis, set aside a couple of meals where you're getting back to like, somebody prepared this food. This food came from somewhere. It required resources. I'm going to like enjoy it on some level and breathe and talk to people. That can be a nice, like humanizing type thing. I agree.
Yeah. Cause I actually personally think that eating is substantially harder than the training. I think the training is the easy part. Eating is far more difficult. Eating enough food to support your training, I think is way harder. I just don't think people appreciate that at all. Because they go ham and crush it in the gym and then they eat like a bird. And then they're like, well, I'm not really getting any better. It's just, I genuinely believe that eating is just the harder of the two variables for myself personally. Other people may disagree, right? But people just, I think, drastically underestimate how much food they should be eating to not only support, but then grow from the type of training and stimulus that they're getting.
Yeah, I informally, like this is my own anecdotal talking to people over the years. I feel like most people would agree with your approach. I think a lot of people would say that the nutrition angle is a little bit more challenging. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's something that expands over the course of the entire day. Training is a little bit more focused, short. I know from my experience, I thought they were equally challenging. I thought they were both really difficult. I was like, I don't like squatting until I feel sick all the time. But that was back in my other life. So, but yeah, no, I think a lot of people will probably agree with you.
Yeah, because the training is so much fun. And then when I have gone through phases of really wanting to try to gain weight, I just have like such vivid memories of sitting at my counter in the afternoon, like, oh, son of a bitch, like it's already 4:00. I've got to get this meal down. And then another 2.5 hours, I got to eat this other meal. I'm just like sitting there, like crying over my like chicken and rice. And I'm like, God, this sucks. It's like if I could just blend this all together and somehow just like get it down easier, because this is taking forever.
That reminds me of my tuna shakes. When bodybuilding, I remember thinking, I'm eating tuna every day. How can I get this down easier? And I came up with the idea of tuna shakes, and it didn't help. It didn't help to end the story.
Oh, dude, no, I would vomit. I would vomit immediately. This is like, so I think I saw this in a Bruce Lee documentary. So Bruce Lee is potentially the originator of the protein shake, and no one do this. Like, do not do this. But he would take raw eggs and raw red meat and he would blend it and then he would drink it.
Wow. Yeah. I have not heard that. I mean, the Arnold stories of the raw eggs was all I heard about. But I never heard about the raw meat.
Yeah. The raw meat and raw eggs.
Do not try that, listeners.
Either that or this documentary was just like making things up, which is another possibility. But I've never seen that. Like, oh my goodness. It's like maybe that's why we lost Bruce at such an early age. Who knows?
That's crazy. That's crazy.
All right, let's transition here because I know that you got a new book coming out, and I want to spend some time talking about this because I know it's been a big passion project of yours for a while. So can you give us the rundown here on the book, what it is, and why you feel that this message essentially needs to be brought to the world?
Yeah. So the book just came out. It's called Swole Planet: Building a Better Body and a Better Earth.
I love it.
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So over the years, my perspective just really started to expand. And this was through schooling and internship and spending more time on farms and working with nonprofits and doing all sorts of different things to kind of expose myself to different parts of the food system. And I just realized that there are things as powerful as it is to know that we can change our eating and change our own physique and performance. We can also change our eating and influence other things in the food system. And I think that can be really empowering for people when they're making food choices, and actually really motivating for people too. Because a lot of times nutrition's all about just like your own personal burdens of performance and body composition. And if you can expand it out to some of these other greater good kind of things, I think it can be really motivational. So that's where the idea really generated from, was thinking more about all these big things in the food system. And over the years, I also noticed a little bit of tension in spending time with people who are really hardcore into training and strength and performance, and then spending time with people who dedicated their life to nonprofits and farming. It seemed like both sides were kind of missing some sort of middle ground. It was like you either don't care at all about the environment and you're just like doing all these things that might harm the environment, or you're just like living in a yurt in the mountains and you totally jeopardize your own strength and wellness and health. So I'm like, there's got to be some sort of a go-between. You're like, how can I bridge the gap between these two worlds? So that's the goal of the book, and that's what I try to write about. I talk about some dietary adjustments we can make that can help our health, our physique, and the farming system, and animal welfare, and farm worker welfare. And I also expand it out to even how we can maybe slightly adjust some of our workout scheduling to maybe benefit the community and the environment a little bit more. For example, that might be, instead of always doing conditioning work like inside on a cycle or a treadmill or something, like you can time it and cycle to the grocery store or walk to the friend's house or something like that. It sounds kind of lame and like it's not revolutionary advice, but that's a really big deal. Transportation is a really big source of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can incorporate it as a 1-2, like it's good for us, good for the environment, that's a great thing. So that's what I get into in the book, and we'll see how it's received.
No, I think it's really important because it's something that we talked about this a little bit off air. One of the things my wife and I want to do when we are going to be moving to Knoxville here, like we want to get 5, 10, 15 acres and be able to peel back and actually spend time growing a lot of our own food, have some of our own farm animals, and just maybe feel like we're doing our little part in how we manage this, because I'm very much like you, like this is a really important issue, both in terms of like the farmland itself, our capacity to grow good, nutritious food to feed people. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Zach Bush, who runs, what is his nonprofit called? He's very big into the regenerative agriculture.
Right.
And so that's something that I've been spending way more time looking into, because just one small sample size of this larger problem that you're talking about is like our soil health is just abysmal. We've been torching it for decades, ever since we started spraying and doing all these other things. Like our soil is a disaster. And I don't know if you can think of anything that's more foundational to our human health than being able to grow food in good soil, right? But these are things that people aren't thinking about. These aren't the conversations we're having, even though, in my opinion, I think it should be impacting your food choices in terms of what I'm buying. Like I'm going to buy from this person. Obviously, it depends on your income and that type of situation because it will cost a little bit more money. But it's like, I'm going to choose to buy from this farmer because I believe in the way that this farmer practices. I believe in the way that he or she grows her food. I believe in the way he or she treats her animals, as opposed to just going and buying like the biggest thing I can find at like Costco or Walmart. And like, I think part of it is people just don't want to know, right? Like they want to have the blinders on. Like, don't show me how the sausage is made. Just give me the sausage. But this is a very important part of the conversation moving forward, because if it's not something that we each take ownership of, like there will be a complication that comes from this. If it's not in our lifetime, it'll be our children's lifetime. If it's not their lifetime, it'll be their kids' lifetime, right? Because we can't keep doing the things we're doing without there being some type of ramification down the line. At least that's my opinion based off of the evidence and my understanding of the science right now.
I think the weight of the evidence would support that. I mean, soil specifically, I mean, if the soil is not healthy and productive, I mean, our food's not going to be healthy, and we're not going to have productive crops and animals into the future. I mean, soil, I always think about like a bank account. So we have to deposit and treat it well and do regenerative farming and add compost and not overly plow and till and do all these practices that build up our soil savings account. Because if we're just looking at it in the short term and just extracting as much as possible and tilling it as much as possible and heavily relying on synthetic fertilizers, that can deplete soil health. That's bad for the long-term productivity and resilience of the soil. It's bad for pollinators. It's bad for the entire food system. So yes, it helps us in the very short term to produce a bounty of calories, but it doesn't lead to a resilient food system long term. And like you said, I mean, if you look at any environmental marker, you can take your pick: water withdrawals, greenhouse gas emissions, algae blooms. It's not looking good for the future of the food system. So we definitely need to make some changes. Like you said, I mean, decentralizing the food system and growing some of your own food, supporting local farmers. Some people would probably argue that's the most important thing we need to do. I definitely think it's probably in the top 5. So there are all sorts of changes. And in my book, I talk about the top 5 big things we can do as eaters in the United States, or really on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another one I would throw in that category also is like the massive monocultural crops, right? It's like a farm, as it was intended, is meant to grow a lot of different things, right? We're not meant to just have hundreds of acres of nothing but corn. And it's such a complex issue. It's an issue that people want to avoid talking about. They don't want to think about this problem. They're like, just give me my food and leave me alone, because I don't want to have to deal with this, because there are so many other problems in the world that we're trying to think about also, yeah. Right? But personally, like, this is one that really strikes home, like, front and center, because I love food. And I think people listening to this love food. You probably like to eat food. But I think that it is well worth it for people to take the extra step to think about, where is this food actually coming from? How is it being prepared? What's going into the production of this? When my wife and I were in Austin, Texas recently, we got to go to a really awesome kind of like big farm dinner. My wife's sister and her husband have good friends that are starting a farm outside of Austin, Texas. And so every once in a while they host these big farm dinners. And it was just fantastic. It was such an amazing experience, because you come together, like you mentioned earlier in kind of our conversation here, where you're really appreciating where the food comes from. People are coming together around this food. Like, you understand exactly where it was grown. You know how it was prepared. And there was just like something really awesome about bringing all these people together around that experience of food. And unfortunately, it's just not something that people, I think, are spending a lot of time on these days. So at least stuff for me, right? If you can buy organic and local, that's great, right? Like, look into how they're actually growing their food. There's a company based out of Texas as well, called Force of Nature Meats. And I order a lot of meat from them. They do a really good job. It's all 100% regenerative ag meat production. So you can put in a little bit of effort, and you can find these places that exist. And it may not feel like you as an N of one person is going to make a difference, but it has to happen as an N of one, because nothing can take place unless you as an N of one person make that decision. And then you can talk to other people about it, right? Because those food choices, the little things you mentioned, like if we can ride a bike to a grocery store, if we can walk to a friend's house, right? Because, right, we don't really know what's going to happen with climate change. Like if you just keep taking carbon from the earth and then dumping it into the atmosphere, that's a really high risk play, in my opinion. It's like we don't really know what's going to happen. But yeah, it's a pretty large gamble.
Yeah. It's easy to downplay, but I do think, what we buy and eat does influence the food system. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say that. Food companies and farmers, they see what people are buying and what they're supporting. And if we support different things and a more sustainable food system, they will adapt to that for sure. And back to your point about respect, the more we respect something, the less likely we are to abuse it. And I think that's really, really critical with food. And there are so many things we could talk about. So check out the book if you're interested in these topics. Hopefully some of the ideas resonate with you.
Yeah, and I'll put one more point there in terms of our decisions as buyers. That's the most important decision, because that's essentially how the market functions. That's capitalism, right? Like the market will decide what moves forward. And the thing that will decide that is, what are people purchasing? Because we can have conversations about what people value, but at the end of the day, the easiest way to actually know what people value is what are they spending money on? And then the market will adapt to that. Right? That's essentially the whole thought process of capitalism and why the market itself is so important. The market will determine that as the future. And so you as the buyer hold that power. But Ryan, man, this is fantastic. Go ahead.
I'll add one last thing. I like 100% high fives, fist bumps to that. And that's what a lot of my book is about. I will say there might be somebody listening, and there are definitely people out there who might not be listening, who it's too much to put it on their shoulders, like to be the ones leading the charge and going to the farmer's market and buying the high quality organic produce or whatever. So I understand that some people are not in a position to be able to take a stand as an eater and buy the optimal choice. So that's when I would say, if we can do something to shape the path and make it easier, whether it's people on social media doing a better job, or restaurants or grocery stores or policies or schools, whatever, to sort of shape the path and make it a little bit easier for people, I'm 100% in favor of those solutions as well.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a fantastic conversation. I feel like we should grab a coffee, maybe over Zoom sometime, and we can really just spend more time on this. But where can people go to, one, find you, and two, find this book and find out more about kind of this whole journey and mission that you're on?
Yeah, if you check out my website, it's ryandandrews.com, and you'll see a link to the book there and a little bit more background about me. And I also have a 90-second video I made at a farm I helped out a couple of years ago, so you might enjoy that as well.
Beautiful. Everybody, thank you so much for dropping in and listening today. We'll be sure to throw links to everything Ryan's got going on in the show notes. But have an amazing week, and we'll talk soon.